Welcome everyone. To celebrate the release of our new Ranger card in Rosetta, I have put together a trap tier list so that you're better able to plan for the worst instead of planning the worst plan. I'll be ranking every trap from worst to best, taking into account various things such as how relevant the effect is, how easy it is to play, its influence on a game, and what the floor and ceiling are. Rankings are also influenced more heavily by more recent sets, but for the most part I think the ordering of these traps is fairly accurate for all metas that they've been in, with a little bit of fluctuation. Kicking things off, we have the completely underwhelming Bloodrot trap. The artwork on this is how it feels to run this card. The artwork is even telling you to not run it because it's a bear trap, which means you can't run if you run it. You get it? Beyond artistic warning signs, this trap is ranked last because its floor is a red defense reaction that blocks for 3, which is awful. The potential value on this trap's effect is anywhere between 4 to 7, but reaction traps are the most inconsistent for triggering, and they often find themselves triggering into heroes that we're already favoured into, such as Warrior and Assassin, and I can tell you we aren't favoured because of traps like Bloodrot. On top of that, we have other reaction traps that are just outright better, which means Bloodrot is last in a queue of niche application traps. To sum up, rubbish floor, niche triggering condition, and doesn't advance a win condition or isn't any sort of blowout. Our next trap continues to create underwhelming emotions inside of my head, and that is Rock Slide Trap. Want to know where my biases lie? Well, I'll tell you. They lie firmly against cards that make it hard for you to do the one thing that they're supposed to do, which in the case of Rock Slide Trap isn't even that good a thing. As a quick disclaimer, Crucible traps all fit the aforementioned description perfectly, and so I have a personal dislike of them at a base level. Plus, the Ranger class is probably the most inconsistent in the game. Drawing those dud hands means that you can do nothing, and Crucible traps add another layer to that, which you really could do without. There's a reason LSS keep printing cards for Riptide to specifically help put these things into the arsenal. Rockslide Trap is just so underwhelming in terms of its effect, and it's really easily bypassed. It's also a block too, so if your opponent has floating resources, which they often will, you're going to need to give Rockslide a bit of a hefty backup. The ceiling on this is usually 5 value, which does not at all make up for the floor being you cannot play this card. The one thing it has going for it is that it's a blue, so it's better into wizards and can be your pitch card for the turn, but then of course you have the anxiety of knowing that in second cycle you have a bunch of useless Rockslide traps coming back to bite you. Our 10th place trap does kickstart a slow upward trend, and that is Tripwire Trap. This is the second Crucible trap, and this one is considerably better than Rockslide, but it's still a filthy Crucible trap. Again, the floor in this thing is 0 because you'll often find yourself unable to use it when you first see it, and it isn't even a good pitch card either. But Tripwire Trap at least blocks for 4, so you can always cover a breakpoint when using it, and the effect on it is a lot better than the Rockslide Trap effect. Honestly, I could see myself actually playing this trap in a world that allows us to consistently make use of Crucible traps the turn we see them, and honestly, every now and then I do try this card out, then I draw it without being able to get it into my arsenal, and I remember why I hate these traps. 9th place again brightens things up slightly, and not just because it's a yellow. We have Pendulum Trap. This is ranked low, but is the first trap that I would class as decent in some Riptide variants, such as Fatigue, because its floor is a card that always blocks for 3 and can be pitched. I rank it so low because it's a reaction trap, so the effect is quite niche, and it doesn't really do much unless you are totally dedicated to a Fatigue plan, but again, you shouldn't struggle to beat reaction-based heroes anyway. If you are playing this trap in any sort of mid-range aggro variants, then you're basically playing a trap that has no text, unless you get super lucky and mill like 2 power cards for example, but it's not consistent. To sum up, it's not a bad card, the floor is good too, with it being a yellow, I just think there are better options. In 8th we have Frailty Trap. This card hasn't really done much for Riptide since Lexi LL'd. That format was where we saw what the ceiling on this thing can be. It stopped her being able to give Bolton shots +1 for go again, and it would often net you a nice 6 to 7 value whilst also making it easier to block certain on-hits, but since then there's not really been a compelling reason to play Frailty Trap. It is an easy trap to trigger in aggro matchups, usually netting like 4 to 5 value, but this is hardly game winning and I'd personally rather play Sink Below. The floor in Frailty Trap is a red block 3 defense reaction, which is terrible, and into many heroes the floor is what you'll get, and that's why I've ranked it 8th. 7th place is Pitfall Trap. I'm conceding some of my very hardline core principles by allowing a Crucible Trap to appear near the middle of the rankings, but I do begrudgingly have to accept that this trap does have some merits to it. For starters, it's a yellow, so drawing it is not a total catastrophe because you can pitch it, And unlike Rockslide Trap, its block value can't be castrated. It can also just do a crap ton of damage and obtain a very effective late game kill for you. Plus, the fact that the effect always triggers can help push damage into some of Riptide's more difficult matchups. I still don't ever really play this card because of the arsenal restriction, but if you really want to, you can. 6th place is where that slow upward trend really starts to take off. We have Inertia Trap. This is the best out of the red traps in my opinion. It's very easy to trigger and the effect can really catch people out. I don't have it ranked higher due to it being a red, which means it technically has the same floor as Bloodrot Trap. However, this trap gives by far the best inertia token you can ever give someone, and what I mean by that is, if you give your opponent the token on your turn through say an attack, they have complete agency over how to plan their turn accordingly, so they can block with whatever they won't be able to use and then just keep the rest for attacking you, not worrying about the inertia token. Giving a surprise inertia on their turn removes all of that agency and can really mess up some nasty plans. It's our very own homegrown nasty surprise. Sitting comfortably in 5th place is Spike Pit Trap. It's the first of the legendary traps and in my opinion easily the weakest. It's still very strong, but it's competing against two absolute powerhouses. Spike Pit is a reaction effect trap, which as we now all know is the worst kind of trap, but it has things going for it that earn 5th spot. Firstly, it's a blue block 3, which is a great floor to have and is coincidentally where Spike Pit Trap is set up, because it means that it has utility into basically every class. For example, if you're against Wizard, it can pitch for 3 for Arcane Barrier, which is fine. Unlike the other reaction traps, Spike Pit can be a great late game win condition. It very much can take out opponents from 9 or so health if you save it late and kinda get lucky. I've won a few games because of this. Usually it'll come in for 3 to 4 if you've pitch stacked, which you normally do, given that Warrior and Assassin often go to second cycle. So it's a very good card at what it tries to do. It's not ranked higher because what it tries to do is just not very relevant into most heroes. 4th just so happens to be my favourite trap, but I'm not biased. Boulder Trap. Just ending up short of the podium. I will fight anyone that says this trap doesn't deserve to be here, and I will win that fight because my opponent will have no armor left as I'll be running 3 Boulder Trap. The effect on this trap is one that lasts for the entirety of a game. Just think how busted that is. No other trap has a permanent effect on the board state like that. We are rangers, and so we have many on hits and many breakpoints, so removing armor is vital. Feel free to check out my video guide on how to remove it, by the way, link in the description. The floor on this trap is great because it's a yellow, so on rate even when not triggering the effect, but when you do trigger the effect, you can net yourself insane levels of straight up vanilla numbers value, and also net a crap load of implied value, given that we have made it more difficult for our opponent to block for the rest of the game. Great card. Into the top 3 now. Before we get into it, I will preface that these 3 traps can win you a game on the spot if you trigger their effect at the right time. They are absolutely busted. The bronze medal goes to Tarpet Trap. For me, this just edges out Boulder Trap because the ceiling on this trap is just obscene. Stopping a Herald of Erudition on hit, for example, denies the opponent a draw 2, a card and soul, and tutoring of an angel. Also while pinging your opponent for 1 just to add insult to injury. Back in the days before Katsu was dishonored, this trap could erase an entire turn. And now with Rosetta releasing, everyone is going to be playing Wolverine Skies. And Tarpet Trap just removes all on-hit text regardless of how big that attack is. That is just insane value from a yellow block 3, which is why I believe it to be currently our 3rd best trap. Now for the final 2. Finalists that I am sure 99% of you knew would be vying for 1st place. But yeah, in 2nd place I have Collapsing Trap, and 1st place I actually have Buzzsaw Trap. This may come as a surprise, but yes, I do genuinely believe that Buzzsaw Trap is our strongest trap. When I first started thinking this tier list through, I actually had the final positions of these 2 traps switched, and a year ago I would have kept Collapsing Trap in 1st. But the game has changed a fair bit in 2024, and it has changed in a way that I think has made Collapsing Trap a bit worse and Buzzsaw much better. So let's discuss both of these traps. For starters, their floor is blue block 3, which is a floor so many heroes get excited about, but what their blue block 3s don't have is insane trigger effects that are easy to utilize. They're both legendary, so you can only have 1, but both can be so devastating that your opponent will often play the entire game with one of these living rent-free in their head. And oftentimes, no matter how badly a game is going for you, if you have one of these in your deck and it's relevant for the matchup, you always have a chance. Collapsing Trap is appropriately named because you can literally collapse an entire turn from under your opponent. Like, this thing is devastating when timed correctly. It's an absolutely punishing card if your opponent tanks a lot of damage to try swing back with a big turn of their own. Honestly, I don't have much to say here because you can just read the effect to see it's busted. Buzzsaw at first maybe doesn't seem quite so insane. It has a much less flashy effect, but in my opinion also a very slightly better one. Reducing any attack to base means that seeing this card is such a relief because you no longer have to work out what silly combat tricks your opponent may have. For example, Nu is coming at you with the Bonds of Agony on a full hand. When you have Buzzsaw Trap in hand, it's such a freeing feeling. There's nothing they can do, and you can keep the rest of your hand to rub salt into that wound on your own turn. It's just a crazy card. So let's discuss why I've put Buzzsaw as the top trap, and I'll begin by talking about Collapsing Trap. To keep it simple, the value you get from Collapsing Trap is a bit inconsistent when compared to Buzzsaw. While Collapsing was great at murdering old aggro combo decks like Katsu, it is not that silver bullet against the newer aggro decks like Zen. For starters, Zen played a lot of his cards from the Banish Zone, so Collapsing would not affect his turn so much, plus he often played ridiculous 7-card hands, and while yes, discarding 7 for Collapsing is good value, an insane roided ninja aggro deck is still coming at you with 6 cards, and his deck happens to be hyper consistent. If we take a look at Brutes, Collapsing can be unreal on their Blood Rush turn until they discard Beast Within. Collapsing can also just outright fix an opponent's hand, and many decks have cute little tricks that let them get around the effect. Now, these issues are not too common, and Collapsing Trap is still an absolute blowout that can win you the game. I'm just trying to highlight the small negatives that give Buzzsaw the edge in my opinion. The sharp edge. Now let's take a look at Buzzsaw. I'll begin with a short story. Victor has several might tokens pop. He does some shopping with some of his gold, swings at me with Golden Sun, I block 4, he double pummels the Golden Sun, and I Buzzsaw. That is a 1 card, like 20-ish value on a blue. That is insane. I like Buzzsaw more than Collapsing because, especially when taking into account the sets from 2024, you are more guaranteed to get obscene levels of value. Every hero from these sets buffs, and they do it a lot. Activating Buzzsaw on a Cast Bones, a Cast Homes, a Mirror Guy, Bonds of Agony, the Decomposers, Lightning Instants, it's just always good, and can really win you a game on the spot. If we look at older heroes, Azalea gets absolutely bodied by this card. It is the freest tempo swing that you'll ever get. It's an absolute silver bullet. In the Riptide Mirror, Buzzsaw is much more of a blowout than Collapsing because it's way harder to play around. So when I look at these two traps in the current CC landscape, I think Buzzsaw slightly edges out Collapsing in terms of its relevance and value. I still love them both equally though, and I'll always include them in my deck. And there you have it, the complete Riptide Trap tier list. I would be interested to know if there are any spots that people disagree with. In fact, I'm sure there are, but I don't mind because debating this is fun. And Plan for the Worst is a card that basically makes all these traps a little bit better, so they're all winners. Anyway, thank you for watching and have a great day.